Hello, I'm Doug Muzzio. This is CityTalk. Here's how the food giants hooked us. Bliss points, mouthfeels, stomach share, the crave. The holy grail of the processed food industry, salt, sugar, fat. Here to guide us through the battlefield of processed foods, $1 trillion worth, is Michael Moss, an investigative reporter with the New York Times. In 2010, he won the Pulitzer Prize for explanatory reporting for his investigation of the dangers of contaminated meat. Before coming to the Times, Mr. Moss was a reporter for the Wall Street Journal and before that, New York Newsday. Michael was a finalist for the Pulitzer Prize in 2006 for his reporting on the lack of protective armor for soldiers in Iraq. He also was part of a team in 1999 who looked at Wall Street's emerging influence in the nursing home industry. Finally, he is the author of Palace Coup, the inside story of Harry and Leonia Helmsley. That must have been a great one. I haven't read it, I apologize, but after reading this, I certainly will. So we've got salt, sugar, fat. It's top of the New York Times bestseller list?
It was, and it's still hanging in there. Last time I checked, number 13.
How do you come to write this book?
I was actually writing about, well, I should back up just a second.
Wow.
Jihadi militants. I was traveling to Iraq and the Middle East, writing about the war on terrorism. And I only mention that because, look, I recognize a war when I see one, and this battle over food now in the United States is a war. The industry likes to see it as a battle for share of your stomach. But some of the lingo that they've come up with to describe their efforts, not just to get you to like their products, but to get you to want more of them. More of them is actually so revealing and so fascinating. So I was initially writing about pathogens in food, right?
That's 2010. Oh, man.
Salmonella, E. coli that would accidentally get into products. And I realized soon on in the reporting that there were things the industry could be doing to protect the safety of consumers that they weren't taking, steps they were not taking. And I was in the course of reporting that out when one of my best sources in the food industry said to me, look, Michael, as tragic as these incidents are, you should look at, there's another looming health crisis of food involving the things that the companies are intentionally putting into their products. And he was talking about salt, sugar, and fat.
Go ahead.
Over which they have absolute control over, as opposed to them being accidental contaminants.
So you win the 2010 Pulitzer Prize for explanatory reporting for a series of pieces, beginning with the burger that shattered her life, which still gives me goosebumps even when I look at it. Yeah. And then in this book, you really do look at the complete picture here. And you open the book very interestingly with an April 8th, 1999 meeting. And the Times magazine cover story also opens with the same incident. Go ahead, talk about that meeting and what it meant.
I was so lucky to come across a trove of documents that really put me at the table of the largest food companies where they're planning, plotting, formulating their way to new products. And in those documents arose this meeting back in 1999. The CEOs, presidents of some of the largest food companies in North America got together for a private, rare meeting at the old Pillsbury headquarters in Minneapolis, brought together to discuss none other than the emerging obesity crisis.
And these guys aren't allies. These are competitors. This is like, the gangland lords getting together around the table.
Yeah, normally they are fighting each other for space in the grocery store shelves and after each other's throats. But they were brought together by a cabal of insiders in these companies who had become increasingly concerned about the obesity crisis and the industry's culpability. And none other than one of their own, here's the most astonishing thing, none other than a senior executive of Kraft named Michael Mudd gets up before them armed with 114 slides and lays at their feet not only obesity, but diabetes, high blood pressure, heart disease. He even starts ticking off a number of cancers that are being linked to processed food. And he says to them, look guys, even if you don't accept responsibility, I'm telling you now, it's not a matter of if, but when the lawyers who went after big tobacco are going to come after us. And then he pleaded with them to collectively, and that's a key word, collectively do something to turn the corner on behalf of consumers and improve the nutrition profile of their products. And from his perspective, the meeting was an utter failure. The CEOs reacted defensively, especially the head of General Mills, according to the people who are at the meeting. Look, we already provide people with low sugar this or low fat that. We give them choices. We are beholden, though, not only to consumers, but to shareholders. And there's no way we're going to start dialing back on the appeal of our products just to meet some concern about obesity, et cetera, which we might be or maybe just partly responsible for. Who knows? The CEOs left the meeting and basically went back to business as usual.
And you, in this book, really get into the business as usual. Yeah. It's highly competitive. It's highly scientific. What struck me was the amount of serious science, double-blind experiments, focus, you name it, neuroscience, they do everything to make us crave their food. And they're extremely competitive. I mean, when you talk about your Coke or the other products, these are cutthroat, no-holds-barred killers.
Yeah, and I'd like to point out that I don't actually view these companies as this evil empire intentionally setting out to make us obese or otherwise ill. They're doing what companies do, which is make as much money as possible by selling as much product as possible, and they do that by hiring the smartest people they can find to formulate, engineer, market their foods. I spent time with the former president for North America of Coca-Cola. Incredible guy. He was one of their fiercest warriors, worked there for 20 years. Jeffrey Dunn is his name. He walked me through their pioneering of the supersize me phenomena, their targeting of kids at corner stores. They're calling their best customers heavy users.
And addicting them to their products, not unlike cigarettes, you would argue.
Yeah, well now, though, you've used the A word. There's no word that the industry hates more than the word addictive. I actually use it sparingly in the book because they make an argument that, look, unlike narcotics, food allures, cravings, if you will, don't have some of the technical thresholds as addiction.
Okay, I'll take it back.
They prefer words like craveability, snackability. One of my favorites is more-ishness, which frankly are just as revealing. More-ishness.
More-ishness.
Yes. To describe their attempts to engineer their formulas to get us to send us over the moon, basically, on their products. I spent time with a legend in the industry, Howard Moskowitz, trained at Queens College in high math, went to Harvard, PhD, experimental psychology. He's responsible for some of the biggest icons in the grocery store. He walked me through his recent creation of a new soda flavor for Dr. Pepper. And to achieve the perfect formula that would send us over the moon and guarantee a hit for the company, he started with 61 flavors, varieties of sweetness, levels of sweetness, each one just slightly different than the other one, subjected those to 3,000 consumer taste tests around the country, took the data, threw it into his computer, did his high math regression analysis thing, and came up with the very precise, perfect optimum, in his word, level of sweetness that would wow us. And he even helped coin the term that the industry uses for that. It's called the bliss point. And the bliss point, most significantly to nutrition people, has migrated through the grocery stores. So, it used to be just the soda aisle and the dessert aisle, but now so many foods in the grocery store have a level of sweetness that's been designed to grab kids. And now kids are taught to expect sweetness in bread. Yogurts can have as much sugar as ice cream.
Spaghetti sauce.
Oh my gosh.
I mean, excuse me.
Exactly. And, even inside, biologists, scientists inside the industry, some of them are appalled by the extent to which the food industry, in their words, has exploited the biology of the child again, so creating these expectations of sweetness.
One of the things that you note, I mean, we're going to be all over the place here, is sort of the biology and the sociobiology of these three elements, sugar being something that sort of we have a natural desire to have with our taste buds, but the others not so much. And you go through, very interestingly, it's very interesting, you break it up into salt, sugar, and fat, and there are vignettes that really explain the phenomenon. Talk about your experiences with each of these three.
I was so lucky to come across a think tank, if you will, a research center in Philadelphia called the Monell Center, funded by the food industry in part, but incredibly independent. It's like when you walk in the door, it's like going to a clubhouse of PhDs, and they have studied the basic allure of foods and the attraction of salt, sugar, fat. And I learned so much from them. You know, sweetness, we are all hardwired for sweetness. Every one of our 10,000 taste buds is wired for the sweet taste, runs along the neurological channel to the pleasure center of the brain, which sends that signal, Michael, love that stuff, eat more of it. Fat, in some ways, is even more powerful. It's not one of the 5 basic tastes that Aristotle wrote about way back when. It's a feeling, it's that sensation you get when you bite into a warm, gooey, toasted cheese sandwich. Even talking
I want one
about
right
it,
now, thank you.
Even talking about it right now,
I'm
my brain is going, Michael.
Right.
Well, so there's a nerve ending that comes down almost to the roof of your mouth that conveys that signal, again, to the pleasure center of the brain. One of the more interesting ones is salt. It turns out we're actually not born liking salt. That doesn't come until 6 months of age. And recent research by the Monell Center indicates that the processed food industry is hugely influential in creating cravings of salt. Kids exposed to processed foods are much more apt to be licking the salt shaker by the time they're in preschool. Yeah.
Okay, now, this meeting ends, the effort doesn't go on. What happens? I mean, your book is not really a Screed or a Jeremiah at all. It really looks at it much more systemically, and as you indicated earlier, there's economic imperatives that are here. But also, it's not only the economics of it, it's the ego. You know, we're going to beat them. There's that type of thing, too. And the kids and the rest of us are sort of collateral damage.
You know, it's that, and also, I mean, look, we've always known that eating too many of these foods, which I call the foods we hate to love, will make you obese or otherwise ill if you eat too many. But what we now know is that these companies have been acutely aware of this for years, going back at least to the 1999 meeting.
And they're creating it. Forget about being aware of it.
2 amazing things happen after that. One, Kraft at the time is owned by Philip Morris, the largest tobacco company, which became the largest food manufacturer in the US when it acquired Kraft and General Foods in the 80s. And for the first 2 decades, the tobacco company executives are doing what you would expect. They're pushing, cajoling, nudging their food people to sell more product. They even lend them some of their marketing tools that have been effective with tobacco. But starting in the late 90s, early 2000s, they say to Kraft, you guys, as a warning, you guys are going to start, you know, having as great a problem, if not greater, with salt, sugar, fat, obesity as we are now with nicotine. Fascinating moment. After the 99 meeting, Kraft, having unsuccessfully tried to get the industry to collectively do something about nutrition, increasing loads, sets out on its own and launches an anti-obesity initiative. And they do 3 incredible things. One, they decide that their marketing to kids is too aggressive. They cut back on marketing sugary products to kids, especially on the Saturday morning cartoon hours, knowing that young kids especially can't distinguish between advertising and reality. 2, they decide they're being less than honest with people in terms of their labeling and disclosures, especially with snack products that have 2 or 3 servings in the bag. Data shows that so many of us are apt to eat the whole bag, but the calories and the fat and the sugar are listed per tiny serving. Kraft began putting the amounts of those levels of the nutrients right there on the package for the whole package, knowing so many of us would eat the whole bag. They wanted to increase the amount of disclosure and warning, if you will, to consumers. Because they cared. They cared about obesity. They cared about their culpability. They cared about losing the public trust.
But other companies don't necessarily follow, and if you stick your neck out, you often get it chopped off.
And that's what happened with Kraft. I mean, they ran into trouble in the cookie aisle almost immediately. competitors came along with cookies that were fatter, richer than Kraft's famous Oreo. Kraft tried to hold the line, but eventually had to nudge the bit, and that's sort of when you saw this plethora of bigger, richer Oreo cookies starting to come out. So again, it sort of speaks to the notion that it's so competitive inside the food industry that even when these companies are well-meaning and wanting to do the right thing by consumers, they have to worry about competitors. They also have to worry about Wall Street breathing down their necks, looking at revenue, sales. Time and again, they've tried to do the right thing and cut back on salt, sugar, or fat, and have been forced to actually reverse course based on pressure from Wall Street.
So clearly there are systemic factors going on here, but there are what other factors are going on here?
Well, if you want to talk about personal responsibility, I actually do in the book.
Go ahead.
There is a moment in the 80s, almost overnight, when it became acceptable to eat anything, anywhere, anytime. And that's kind of when you started seeing people walking down the street, eating and drinking and snacking and bringing food into business meetings. That played right into the hands of the processed food industry, especially the snack industry, because it led to the development of so many products that are hand-to-mouth, mindless eating, critics call it, cutting out sort of that part of the brain that has brakes and will put the brakes on your eating, not paying attention.
This is me. You're talking about me.
Yeah, well, me too. Believe me, potato chips are mine.
Oh, wait a second. Last night, I read all the articles. I read the book. Lay's potato chips, Ripples. I had a half a bag of Ripples. It was terrible. I felt so bad, but I did it.
Well, it's so fat, and I got cravings too in writing the book, just listening and talking to these scientists. And, you mentioned potato chips. So it turns out potato chips, not only salty, right? We all know they're salty.
Oh, yeah.
Right on top, it creates what the industry calls the flavor burst. It's the first thing to dissolve in your saliva to send those signals to the brain.
Right.
They're loaded with fat. Mouthfeel, likewise, straight to the pleasure center of the brain. But what I didn't know is that they actually have the Holy Trinity. They have all three. They're loaded with sugar.
Really?
Not sugar that's added, but sugar in the form of the potato starch itself, which begins to immediately turn to sugar the second it hits your tongue. And so you've got all three working together. And not only the ingredients, but they've done research showing that the louder a chip is when you bite into it, the more you want it. So they engineer them to be loud, and on and on and on. It's totally phenomenal. It's just amazing.
Tell me, what's your aisle behavior? Well, you've got kids.
Yeah.
How has this affected you, and how guilty are you when you down that bag of potato chips?
So look, one of the problems—
What behavior changed?
One of the problems I write about, by the way, is the demise of the home economic. So it used to be that girls and even boys were taught how to shop, how to cook, how to
When I went to school many years ago.
That fell by the wayside. So our kids know almost nothing about the nutrition of foods. We've been trying to talk to them a bit about it. My wife, Eve, the other day said, hey guys, why don't we limit ourselves to cereals with 5 grams of sugar per serving or less? And we discovered that now when we go shopping with the boys, it's a bit of like an Easter egg hunt. They will pull the boxes off the shelves, look at the fine print, and they can find cereals, Cheerios, Total K, Special K, Total, that have really low amounts of sugar.
That they can eat.
Well, that they can eat. The problem, there's 2 problems. One, they have to look low or get me to reach high.
Okay, yeah, that was the eye level is all bad stuff.
The most strategic, they strategically place the sugariest cereals at eye level because they know that that's where your eye goes when you walk into the aisle. So you've got to get around that. But I also find that engaging the kids, then my boys are more apt to like those lower sugar cereals, knowing that getting too much sugar is bad for you.
Sure. What about you?
I've been working on the pasta sauce because look, I realized that hey, I can make my own spaghetti sauce and it's not that hard, right?
We Italians do it all the time. Come on.
Onion, garlic,
some herbs,
olive oil, some herbs, a can of whole tomatoes.
And you can throw all kinds of stuff in.
Pinch of sugar like my mom used to add,
Really?
a pinch of salt if you want to. Yeah, just for like family habits. 5 minutes you can be eating a spaghetti sauce. And it actually costs less than the stuff on the shelf, the commercial stuff. So I've been working on that.
Okay. Let's step back in a sense and talk about reporting and writing. I mean, there's a real difference. how much of your effort is reporting, as you define it, and how much of it is writing, and sort of tell me how this comes together.
Yeah, it kind of went hand in hand. Once I realized that salt, sugar, fat was the Holy Trinity, I began thinking about organizing the book in that fashion. I actually start with sugar, and about half of the book is on sugar, because it's
Right.
really kind of the most important.
I was confused because the first chapter is about sugar and you've got salt in the title. What's the story with this?
The title just rolls off your tongue. I mean, just frankly, it doesn't really work in other ways, right? Salt, sugar,
So you're
fat.
using the same kind of techniques that the food company's doing, testing all this out.
You know, in wanting people to approach the subject and find it readable and attractive and informative. So once I divided the sections up, then it was a matter of just sort of getting, looking at the documents, getting the top scientists to talk to me, and telling.
You sound as if this is easy.
Well,
excuse me.
I'm a reporter. Look, I've been a reporter for more than 30 years now. I'm trained in that regard. But frankly, I had a lot of help because there are any number of smart people inside the industry who have come to have regrets about what they've done. Now, these are not ordinary whistleblowers that are calling me up on the phone saying, hey, Michael, I got a story to tell.
Right.
But once I had the documents and once I understood sort of all the factors going into this, they were willing to open up and tell me secrets about the creation of the products, and in some cases about their internal struggles with their own companies to turn the corner on behalf of consumers.
So you had both memos, which I presume many people hadn't read since they were originally written, as well as personal interviews. Now, were there any what were the aha moments? You've got these documents, you've got interviews where it just went right, and then it opened up a new avenue of viewing things.
One of the biggest aha moments for me was when I got to the salt section and I realized that the food industry is more hooked on salt than we are. I went to Kellogg and I said, hey guys, what's up? Everybody wants you to cut back on the salt in your food. Why can't you do it? And so they prepared for me special versions of some of their biggest icons without any salt in them. It was one of the most horrific tasting experiences I ever had. We started with the Cheez-Its. Normally, I could eat those all day long.
Oh, right. I mean, come
we
on.
couldn't even swallow.
We should have some here.
They stuck to the roof of our mouth without salt because salt provides texture, solubility. We moved to the frozen waffles, popped them in the toaster. They came out looking and tasting like straw without salt. And then the clincher was the cereal, poured milk on it. It tasted, before I could say anything, the spokeswoman for the company was sitting there. She got this look of horror on her face and said, metal, I taste metal. And I'm thinking, yeah, I feel like one of my fillings got loose and is sloshing around in my mouth. And the chief scientist is sitting there going, yeah, not everybody will taste this, but one of the things that makes salt a miracle ingredient for us is that it will mask some of the off notes, the bad flavors that are inherent to processed food. So salt on all three levels, besides adding utter inexpensive taste to foods, makes the food industry hooked on that. And that was a really revealing moment.
Okay, another thing that I found interesting, but as a political scientist, I guess I knew this all along, was the government's role.
Yeah.
That the Food and Drug Administration, the USDA, in a sense, they are involved in multiple conflicts of interest, and it's almost by design. And if there's villains, in a sense, they're almost the villain.
In many ways, the companies that these agencies are there to regulate on behalf of consumers,
they capture them,
are more powerful than the industry.
Yeah.
Case in point is cheese. I walk through
the whole thing. It's unbelievable.
Again, detective story question. Why is our consumption of cheese tripled since the 70s? Nobody had really any idea, but I started looking at it, and it turns out there's this great backstory. We started drinking less milk starting in the 60s in order to cut back on saturated fat, which is the fat that's linked to heart disease if you get too much of it. So that left the dairy industry with a glut of whole milk and milk fat, which is extracted from whole milk to make skim milk. They started making more ice cream, butter, cheese. They made so much cheese it began piling up. Ronald Reagan comes in the office with his slimming down the federal government. His ag secretary found out about the caves filled with cheese and goes, we've got to put a stop to this. And they did, to their credit, But then Congress turned around and said, well, we can't just leave the dairy industry
Right,
hanging.
right.
They create a scheme that empowered the dairy industry to raise tens of millions of dollars every year to promote increased consumption of cheese, not just cheese for itself, like on a sandwich or as an hors d'oeuvre, but cheese as an additive, both in home cooking and processed food.
Pizza.
Increase.
Oh, excuse
Pizza
me.
now has not just cheese on top,
But cheese in the middle, cheese in between.
dough and piles of cheese.
And it's and one of the things you point out in the book is that there's no bliss point for cheese. You could fat. You could just.
Yeah.
There's no stopping it.
If there
you can just eat it forever.
It's up there.
That's
in
our potato
heavy,
chip
think
problem.
about heavy cream land, and not only that, but they've discovered when you add a little bit of sugar to fat, then your ability to even detect the fat declines. And so the body's natural brakes on getting you to keep from overeating.
But the mouthfeel is, come on.
And the mouthfeel is just
Just
fantastic.
wonderful.
I'm a salt and fat guy myself.
Yeah, me too.
believe me.
Yeah, my wife likes, well, she's more ice cream on the potato chips and salty nuts type.
And again, nothing wrong with cheese. I don't.
No,
want
no, no,
anything
no, no,
because
right.
It's just the amount that we are now
And how it's
eating.
used strategically in the
Yes,
product.
there we go.
Okay. What are the possibilities? What might happen out there regarding food, considering that you've got these two forces? You've got sort of the corporate food industry, and you've got us consumers, if you will.
Well, you got to talk to about the mayor, right? And his soda, trying to cut back on soda. Look, and I'm empathetic with people who accuse him of being a nanny, but those people have to realize it's not a level playing field. And in the absence of government intervention, you've got the soda industry spending as much money as they can to capture kids especially and win them over to their brand. You've got another number out there. Estimates of the cost of the obesity crisis run as high as $300 billion a year.
And the numbers are awful. 1 in 3 adults, 1 in 5 kids clinically obese. I mean, it makes the situation in 1999 look benign.
So if you don't want to tax the unhealthier food, then something to think about is shifting the subsidies that now go into processed foods over to the fruits and the vegetables, and figure out ways to make and market those foods so they're less expensive and more attractive, so that when we go into the store well-meaning, wanting to buy more fruits and vegetables for our families, we don't get, hit in the pocketbook and having to spend more money.
Your next Pulitzer Prize winning series of pieces.
It's a really important issue.
Good. My thanks to Michael Moss for his part in sounding the alarm about the food we eat, and for his book, Salt, Sugar, Fat, How the Food Giants Hooked Us. See you next week when we talk to New York State Controller and frequent guest here, Tom DiNapoli, right here on CUNY TV. Thank you.
Thank you.
Excellent.
Great.
Hello, I'm Doug Muzzio. Let us know what you think about this show. You can reach us at CUNY.TV. When you get there, click on the bar that says Contact Us and send your email. Whatever it is. Thanks, no thanks, obnoxious, do it. Send it.